What's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about some of my most favorite video games. Now the reason I really wanted to make this video, since it's not necessarily bookish, is I wanted to focus on games that I enjoyed the story most of. Now some of these I've played, some of them I have not personally played, but I have watched people play them and I've really enjoyed them more so for the story than anything. So please do not attack me for not playing some of these games, because I think you can still be a gamer and not have played a lot of video games in your life, because some of them you just can't get and some of them you think you enjoy more by watching somebody else play. So to first start this off, I want to start with one of my most beloved series of games that I've actually played a little bit of on my channel, and that is the Fable series. So I have with me the anniversary edition of Fable 1, Fable 2, and Fable 3. The Fable series was actually a game series that my dad had introduced me to when I was about, I would say 5 or 6 years old. At the time when the first Fable game came out on the Xbox, on the original Xbox, that can tell you how old basically I am for the most part. It was a game that I had not really known anything about until I got a little older, but I remembered that when my dad was playing, it was something about being a hero and really kind of just making your own path within the game. Like, you could choose to be good or bad, and it just affected the way that your gameplay kind of went. The real test of that came in, I think, Fable 3, because you had a little bit more of an active role in deciding what kind of a person you became. And I think in general, the overall series of the games ended up just getting better and better because of not only the graphics, but the overall story, as there is one character from the very beginning of the story that plays into Fable 3. And that is a character who pretty much was the sister of the main character from the first game. And I didn't realize that until after I had played the anniversary edition of Fable 1. I think the real big story element that I loved the most about this was that we had the same character used throughout each of the 3 games, but she didn't have a really large role in the game other than the mentor. But in the first game, she had a little bit of a larger role because of the fact that she was very young, and we got to see her kind of progress in that game. And then the next 2 games, in Fables 2 and 3, you got to see her more as of a mentor and trying to aid the individual that you are playing into being kind of more of in line of the hero that her brother was. I just think that the overall stories of each of these games individually and cohesively worked really well, because each game takes place in a different part of time. The first one obviously being when the mentor is kind of at a younger age, like about 10. The second one being when she's kind of more in her 30s and 40s, and Fable 3 being much more at the time where this mentor is in like her elderly years. And you kind of get to see the differences in the world that this is all placed in, and you really get to understand throughout these games how the town and how the kingdom really grows and blossoms, but also really kind of becomes more decrepit in some areas because of the things that have happened over the course of time. A lot of this is really nostalgia for me because, again, this is a series I have known since I was very, very young, as my dad had really gotten into it, but is one that I think really played well into my childhood in my storytelling abilities, and especially Fable 3 being one of my most favorite ones. I think that the overall idea of basically having almost a choose your own adventure story within it was a really big part of my love for video games and my love for stories in general. Another series that I think was a huge impact on my life as a kid was the Soul Calibur series. Now here I only have Soul Calibur 5 and 6, which 6 is the newest one, but when I was a kid, I actually used to play Soul Calibur 2 on my original Xbox. Soul Calibur 2 was very much similar in the arcade style with Soul Calibur 5 and 6, but basically the story mode was not as memorable because for me, I didn't used to play the story mode a lot. When I was very young, between the ages of like, I'd say 5 to about 13 or so, I think, was when we got rid of the Xbox. My sister and I would play the arcade mode and basically just play that and play that and play that, and the story mode was never really something I got invested in. But I do remember at one point when I was a little older, when I was like probably 13 or so, getting involved in the story mode, and I really liked the idea of it because it was very much a level-based game where you kind of would defeat one character and then you move up to the next level and the next level, and essentially you would get to learn about different kinds of characters and their pasts, and you get to meet with them and work with them. And sometimes you have to fight them, and I thought it was a really cool idea. And from what I know of Soul Calibur 6, although I have not really played it much as of yet, is very similar in that way where you're basically learning more about this world. This is taking place years after Soul Calibur 2, obviously, so a lot of things are different, but the overall feeling of the world seems to be the same. There's a bunch of new characters that are involved with the story, but a lot of the same old ones I remember from when I was like a kid, and they all have very different storylines when it comes to the overall events of this game. And I think that kind of similar to the Fable series, it kind of plays well with the idea of the story continuing on this timeline and all the characters having kind of just adapted to what is happening now. And I really like the idea of that, because I think that when it comes to stories, that's the most important part, is if you have a story that's going on across the timeline of several years, it's important for your character to show how they have adapted to those different environments and different times, because obviously they're going to be affected by it, and if they're not affected by it, then they're obviously not really a part of that world that's involved within it. Now, as far as this next one, I think it's more so because I think that the general ideas from TV show to video game have really been spot on, and a big part of it is because the game developers were part of the TV series, and that is South Park: The Stick of Truth. I had started watching South Park when I was like 14 or 15, I think, and when I first heard that The Stick of Truth was coming out, I was very excited about it because I was pretty sure that it was going to have the same qualities that the show did, and it pretty much had everything that the show had done and basically put it into video game form, and I really liked it a lot because I think that it made a really good adaptation. The second game, The Fractured But Whole, is really similar in that aspect. I don't have it, but I really would like to, because The Stick of Truth has been really fun to watch Robert play, because I'm a little too lazy to play it myself, but it's been really fun to watch him play it, and it's definitely become one of my more favorites because I think it definitely is a great adaptation of the show and the stories that are done within the show South Park itself. So I have a couple other games that I don't personally have or are on my PC that I haven't played in a long time that are still, I think, really important, and one of them is the Stanley Parable, of all things. This is a very simple game. It's a choose your own adventure kind of thing, and you get a lot of choices within the story, and that's kind of the whole point of the game, and it's the reason why it's one of my most favorite games of all time. The big thing is that obviously with the fact of having all these different choices, you really get to make the story however you want, and you can decide to go against what the narrator says, you can decide to go with what the narrator says, you can kind of deviate in some ways from different paths, and I just think it's so interesting because it's really a game that talks about the idea of choice within video games, because a lot of games are very linear. They have a set plot and a set way for you to go about the game, and you don't really have any leeway to go about that. And then you have games that are more like this, where you have pretty much all of the leeway that you want to have, and you really get to make the story your own. And I think it's a game that challenges the idea of having such strict storylines, because unfortunately for a lot of authors, they get very stuck in their ways, and they get very stuck in the way that their world is, especially within fantasy, that if they go outside of that, it kind of creates some chaos. But I think one of the great things about especially things like fantasy work is that a lot of times the world is so open that you can pretty much make anything you want within this world, and it makes it so much easier because then you get to have so much more fun with the world itself and the people and the different things about it. And I think the Stanley Parable is a really great parallel to that, because it's pretty much this open world within the confines of this game, and you can really make the story go any way you want to, and you're gonna have fun every time you play one specific ending or not. And finally, the last game that I would like to talk about that I think just has a really interesting, complex story by itself is actually Outlast 2. Outlast 2 is probably my favorite out of the Outlast games that have come out, because Outlast 1 I thought was just a little too much for me. It was a little kind of on the weird side because of the idea of the shadow that's involved within the story that kind of is taking over the asylum. I didn't quite grasp that idea, but Outlast 2 I think had a lot more of an interesting story, because I think it was more on the realistic side of what really goes on sometimes within our world, especially with kinds of groups that get involved and basically make lives of their own. In Outlast 2, you follow an investigative journalist and his wife as they go into this area in Arizona that's kind of abandoned because there was a young woman who was found barefoot pregnant and basically died in the middle of the desert, and nobody knows exactly what happened to her, where she came from, and basically the journalist and his wife go to this place and their plane crashes, and then they are taken in by this cult that essentially is run by a guy who thinks that he's like this prophet. He basically has this whole thing go on within the story that you find out about what he does with a lot of the women there, and basically makes everyone believe that the Antichrist is coming, and the investigative journalist and his wife are a part of the Antichrist coming and destroying the world, when really they're just trying to get the heck out of the desert. I just really liked, I think, a lot of the story building that was done through a lot of the notes and things that the character that you play goes through, and also there was a hidden little bit of a storyline within it because it delved in a lot into the main character's past and something that happened to him when it came to a friend of his who had mysteriously died. And as you're going through the story of Outlast as this guy is an adult, you're getting flashbacks and kind of almost like these memory scenes of things that happened when he was younger that he's kind of trying to come back to, because a lot of it is repressed, and you find that out as you go through the story that a lot of it seems to be in a more repressed state. And I just really liked the overall story of it. I liked the complexity of it, and I liked how the main character just himself was really kind of complex in and of himself, because he was dealing with something on the inside that he had not really talked about to anybody, and it was kind of coming out through the things that he was experiencing in his actual adult life with trying to escape this desert with his wife. But there you guys go, those are some of my favorite video games that have really great storylines. So if you guys have any other suggestions for games that you really like based on their stories, please let me know down in the comments below, as I would love to check out more games that have really good storylines, because some of the games that are out there are really cool, but I don't quite get their stories because of the fact that there's so much that goes on within them that it's hard for me to decipher what exactly the real story is, and I have to go look it up, and then it's just a whole mess of trouble. And as always, if you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!